Hey, welcome all of you guys to Prairie Lakes Church. We're really glad that you're here. My name's Jesse Tink. I'm one of the pastors here at Prairie Lakes. I get a chance to support and kind of resource all of our campus pastors across our 6 sites in Iowa. And so wherever you're joining us from, man, we're so glad that you're here. Hey, we're going to start a new series and talk a little bit about that this morning. But before we do that, you're going to need just 2 things, okay? First thing you're going to want ready is a Bible. And so if you've got that, if you brought yours, great. We've got them in the seats wherever you're at. Your phone, your tablet works great too. That's the first thing. Second thing you're going to maybe want is something to write with. So ushers right now, why don't you guys come on forward? Just raise your hand if you want to take some notes this morning. Hey, last weekend, Pastor John shared something with us that's pretty important. It's probably one of the most important messages we've given here at Prairie Lakes in a while. So if you've missed it, hop on our website sometime this week and take a look, prairielakechurch.org, and just click on sermons. You can watch the whole thing. But big picture, if you missed it, here's what Pastor John shared. He shared, first of all, about our mission, okay? And so our mission at Prairie Lakes, here's what we're aiming for. Our mission is to cover Iowa with churches where it doesn't matter who you are, where you've been, what you've done, or what's been done to you. I was getting my hair cut a couple of weeks ago at a barbershop, brand new barbershop in Waterloo, 5 Seasons, and I was just talking about it, and one of the barbers there goes to Prairie Lakes, and we started talking about this phrase, and you could just see the other barbers kind of go, I want to go to that church, you know? Right? Because no matter who you are, where you've been, what you've done, you can look for God here. And listen, just to be really clear, the reason that we're like that isn't because we're just nice and we're just non-judgmental. The reason that we feel like we can be a church like that is because Jesus has done everything for us already. He's done everything for us already to make a way to be with God. And so it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you've done. Jesus died for you, and he loves you, and we do too. So that's our mission. We want to cover the state of Iowa with churches like that. And here's our vision. So that's our mission. Here's our vision for this year. Here's what we want to do. We want to close the gap in order to launch 1 campus a year. We want to launch 1 church across Iowa every year that no matter who you are, where you've been, what you've done, what's been done to you, you can look for God and help 20 Iowa churches get better. Some of you who came last week saw a video of a cohort of pastors. We got pastors all across Iowa who we just kind of partner with and try to achieve some of these missions together, okay? So that's our mission, our vision, and I'm just going to say, I've been a part of Prairie Lakes Church for almost 20 years now, since I was a freshman in college, and that still sounds weird coming out of my mouth, freshman and 20 years ago, but that is the deal. And so over the course of those 20 years, I've heard Pastor John, say stuff like this, a lot, like big missions and big visions and crazy goals and a bunch of other stuff. So I'm not as caught off guard by this as I used to be, although I'll just confess sometimes I still am. But and especially, if this is your first weekend with us, right? If this is your first weekend, you're a guest, and you hear us talking about, missions and visions and stuff, and you kind of go, hey, am I getting myself into kind of a clever pyramid scheme or something, Hey, I just want to say I totally get it. I've been here 20 years and I still find myself kind of in that same spot of like uncertainty, right? Like we're really gonna do this. We're just gonna launch 1 church a year. We're just gonna go ahead and do that. We're gonna find the money to do that. We're gonna find and hire the staff. Not to mention, we're gonna find people in cities who actually want a Prairie Lakes Church there, and they also want to jump in and serve and give and all that. So we're just gonna do that, right? Because it's easy to say it. It's easy to say it. It's always a lot easier to say something than it is to actually do it. Now, don't get me wrong. I want to be a part of a vision like this. Like, I don't want to be a part of a vision that's small. I don't want to be a part of a vision that I can kind of do, that we can kind of do in our own power, Or worse, I don't want to be a part of a church where the vision, the mission isn't really stated at all. We're just kind of showing up to show up. I don't want to be a part of a church like that. I want to be a part of a church like this, but I also live in the real world, where where you're not just measured by the things that you say you're going to do, you're measured by what you've actually done. And I'll just confess, I hear things like this, I see things like this, and I go, great, great. Why don't you jump on my side of the fence and how are we going to do this? Tell me how are we going to do this? It's a great vision, but just get this. A lot of life is lived in between these two places. Okay? A lot of life is lived in between these two places, the place where I've got a vision for where I want to go, but I've got my current reality of where I am. And a lot of life is lived between those two places. It just is. A lot of life is trying to figure out how do I make this vision real in my life. And so that's where we're going to live for the next 3 weeks here at Prairie Lakes Church, that place in between, okay? The place where we start to clarify the work of what we have to do to close the gap between where we're at currently and where we want to go. All right? So here's how the series is going to play out. This weekend we're going to be talking about my responsibility. Specifically, we're going to talk about volunteering and serving. Next week we'll talk about my relationships, get into a discipleship relationship. And then week 3 we'll talk about my resources, okay? So let's get into it together. Grab your Bibles, open up to 2 Samuel 23 is where we're going to start this morning, 2 Samuel 23, okay? And eventually we'll be reading verses 8 through 17. So if you've never opened the Bible before, 1 Samuel's in the Old Testament. That's closer to the front than the back. Use your table of contents to find it. And it's going to be a little bit before we actually read it. So just put your finger there if you've got a physical Bible. But let me just kind of catch you up on the story here. 2 Samuel is the second of 2 books named after a prophet. Samuel. And prophets were people who heard from God directly. Like God would say something to them, and then their job was to say what God said to them to the people. They were mouthpieces, essentially. And at the time, God's people weren't anybody who just believes in Jesus across the world like it is today. At the time Samuel lives, God's people were exclusively the Hebrew people, a group of Middle Eastern tribes that eventually became the nation of Israel, or the Jews. And Samuel is actually going to preside over the establishment of Israel's monarchy. He is going to anoint the first king of Israel. And he anoints a man named Saul, okay? Saul's the first king of Israel. Saul rules as king for like 42 years, according to 1 Samuel 13. But as the book of 1 Samuel ends, and as the book of 2 Samuel begins, here's what we see. We see Saul kind of decline in prominence, then we see another guy, David, kind of rise in prominence. And if you don't know anything about the Bible, I'm willing to bet that you might know David, because he's the same David from the story of David and Goliath. David's the dude who killed the giant with the slingshot. That's him. And it's this event, actually, that launches David into the public eye. Privately, however, Samuel, the prophet who anointed Saul, he had anointed David to succeed Saul. David's future was going to be that God said, you're going to be the next king of Israel. That's what David's future was. But from the time David is anointed as the next king, all the way to the time where he becomes the next king, there's a lot of in-between time. There's a lot of in-between time. Remember what we said, a lot of life happens in between the vision for the future and the reality of the present. It was true in David's case as well, okay? Because Saul, the sitting king, was not a big fan of David. Not a big fan, okay? Like most kings or heads of state, not real keen on giving up their power, especially when it wasn't their decision. So Saul wanted to hold on to it. And so a good chunk of 1 Samuel tells us the story of Saul trying to kill David. And he tries to do this for years. In fact, after David kills Goliath, David becomes a member of Saul's royal court. And Saul tries to kill David in the palace by hurling a javelin at him in order to, quote from the Bible, pin him to the wall a couple of times. Okay? Like more than once this happens. And I don't know about you, but if that happened to me once, I think I'd be out. David, it took him twice. And so David finally gets the hint, and he heads out on the run. But Saul chases him. Saul takes the baddest dudes from Israel's army and chases David through the rugged Middle Eastern terrain, village to village, cave to cave, on the run, fleeing for his life. So just think about that for a second, okay? Put yourself in David's shoes. The God of the universe, who has all the power in the world apparently, whose word is reality apparently, the God of the universe had said, David, you're going to be the next king. You're going to be the next king. And that happened. This is what your future, God, David, my vision for your future is you're the next guy. And then shortly after that, 2 assassination attempts, and then on the run, fleeing for your life for literally years, all of that in between time. See, if you're David's shoes, wouldn't you be thinking, like, what is the deal, God? What is the deal? One day your prophet Samuel comes to my dad's house, and we didn't invite him. He just came, and then he pours some oil on my head and says, you're going to be the next king. I wasn't running for office, I didn't really ask for any of this, but this was your vision, God. This was your vision for my future. Your words for what the future holds for me. And now I'm hiding here in the back of a cave with an army on the outside, and if they find me, I'm dead, And I think this brings a sharp focus to an uncomfortable truth about vision. And that is this, okay? Vision never becomes reality without real people meeting real uncertainty with real sacrifice. Vision never becomes reality unless real people meet real uncertainty with real sacrifice. Even with God's visions. Maybe especially with God's visions. God's visions always require real people to meet real uncertainty with real sacrifice. And in light of this truth, we probably need to just get something out of our heads if it's there. Because I think we've got this weird expectation that when it comes to God's visions, they just kind of happen magically. Or easily, maybe. It should be easy. Or maybe they come into reality when someone who has got these supernatural, otherworldly kind of gifts or callings or anointings, they do their thing, and then poof, giants fall. Or kingdoms are just handed over. Or one church becomes 6, or 6 churches become a network of churches that cover entire states. Just magic, no uncertainty, no sacrifice required. Hey, let me just assure you, okay, and maybe remind you if you already knew, that's never the case. That's just not how it works. Visions only ever become reality as real people like you and me, real people meet real uncertainty with real sacrifice. Period. It's true of any vision. It's certainly true of God's vision. And 2 Samuel 23 gives us a little glimpse of how this truth plays out and how it played out in David's story. See, while David is still running from Saul in that in-between time, David has other people, real people, who respond to God's vision for Israel. And these people meet real uncertainty with very real sacrifice, okay? So 2 Samuel 23, we're finally ready to kind of read. Start reading with me in verse 8 of 2 Samuel 23. These are the names of David's mighty warriors. Josheb-Bashebeth, and if you're wondering if I have practiced that a lot, the answer is yes, I did. And he was a Tachkemonite. Did I practice that a lot? I did not. It's a big guess. Josheb was chief of the 3. He raised a spear against 800 men, whom he killed in one encounter. Next to him was Eleazar, son of Dodai the Ahohite, maybe. As one of the 3 mighty warriors, he was with David when they taunted the Philistines gathered at Pas-damim for battle. Then the Israelites retreated, but Eleazar stood his ground, and he struck down the Philistines till his hand grew tired and froze to the sword. That's a bad dude there. The Lord brought about a great victory that day. The troops returned to Eleazar, but only to strip the dead. And next to him was Shema, son of Agi, the Hararite. When the Philistines banded together at a place where there was a field full of lentils, Israel's troops fled from them, but Shammah took his hand in the middle of the field. He defended it, and he struck the Philistines down, and the Lord brought about a great victory. Right? Just real people, meeting real uncertainty with real sacrifice. Yeah, right? Those guys totally sound like real people to me, right? Totally normal. People who put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you and me, right? And who apparently can go all Keanu and take down like 800 people in a single encounter. They don't sound like real people. They don't. They don't sound like, these sound like heroes. These sound like heroes. These sound like people who possess those otherworldly capabilities. Those are the people who can bring grand visions into reality because they can, right? Unlike the rest of us schmucks. Well, before we go further down kind of that way of thinking, just hang on and read the next verse with me, verse 13. Here's who these guys were. During harvest time, 3 of the 30 chief warriors, that's these 3 guys, Josheb-Basshebeth, Eleazar, and Shema, they came down to David at the cave of Adullam, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. And at the time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. See what you're looking at in these 2 verses here? It's kind of a flashback, if you will, okay? It's a look back in time to the very beginning of their story, before they were known as the 3 or the mighty anything. And what happens is when they come to David, David's in a cave, and he's in this cave of Adullam, and he's there because he's fleeing from Saul. He's hiding. He's in that in-between time after he's been anointed king, but before he becomes the king. And we actually get more detail about this flashback a little earlier in 1 Samuel. You don't have to turn there, but this is from 1 Samuel 22. This talks about what happened to David when he was in the cave, okay? Take a look at this. David left Gath, which is a Philistine town, and he escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him from there. And all those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him. See, that's who David's mighty warriors were before they were known as mighty anything, right? That's who these 3 guys were. They were distressed, they were in debt, and they were discontented. In other words, they were real people. They really were. They really were. They weren't the superheroes. They weren't the pros. They were real people. And these real people voluntarily meet David in a cave on the run facing an army, which kind of forces us to ask ourselves this question: who volunteers for that? Who volunteers for that? I mean, the working conditions are caves or wherever we can hide so we don't get killed. Your coworkers are other distressed debtors who are discontent. That's who you're working with. Your pay is some food, maybe, if the rations don't run out. The odds of success are pretty grim. And by the way, if you don't succeed, it doesn't just go on your performance review. You're going to die. So jump on our team, right? And it gets a little crazier. Because you think that's a weird thing to sign on for. Take a look. Go back to 2 Samuel 23. Let's read verse 13 together, and let's keep on reading, okay? So now that we know who these guys are. During harvest time, 3 of the 30 chief warriors came down to David at the cave of Adullam, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. At the time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. So this is before, some of us know the story of Bethlehem. That's where Jesus was born. But this was before Bethlehem was even an Israelite city. In fact, at this time, it was a Philistine garrison, the enemy's army base. Okay? And so David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would just get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." Said it in passing, I'm sure. Was not a command. So, this is where the 3 mighty warriors get their name, because the 3 mighty warriors broke through the Philistine lines, drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and carried it back to David. See, for 3 of these 400 guys, volunteering to be a part of the suicide squad was apparently not enough for them. Without even being asked, they voluntarily risked their lives for a bucket of water so David could have a drink. It's like next level volunteering, right? It's like super volunteering. Who does that, right? Who does that? What causes someone to volunteer for that? Why in the world would someone voluntarily take on that responsibility? And maybe we frame our question up a little bit differently. How about this? What if we ask this question here, okay? What if we ask this question instead? What inspires real people to voluntarily meet real uncertainty with real sacrifice? What inspires people to do that? What inspires that? Because that's how visions get realized. Visions get realized when real people meet real uncertainty with real sacrifice. But what inspires them to do that? What causes them to leave the relative safety and comfort of their current circumstances in order to take on greater and greater levels of responsibility and greater levels of personal sacrifice? What causes 400 people to hop into a cave when the enemy's army is at the door? And what inspires 3 dudes to bust into an army base for a glass of water? What is it? I think it's actually embedded in the story, and I think the answer is this. I think the answer is discontent. I think that's what inspires people to do it. I think it's that third D word to describe all these guys. They were distressed, yeah. They were in debt, yeah. But they were also discontented. They were discontented. They were not content with the way things were. They were not content to see Israel's next king on the run in caves. They were not content. They were not content with what was going to be happening in their lives, how their lives were playing out. They weren't content. So they volunteered their time, their swords, even their very lives for something different, for something greater, for something better than life and reality in the present. I think it's discontent. Real people meet real uncertainty with real sacrifice when they finally grow discontent enough with the way things are. And when real people grow discontent enough with the way things are and they do something about it, that's when vision starts to become reality. I mean, it's absolutely amazing what God can do with real people when those real people finally grow discontent enough with the way things are or the way things have always been. When real people say, forget the odds and forget the cost. Because when discontent turns into sacrifice, even on the smallest of scales, God multiplies it. When discontent turns into sacrifice, when real people get discontent enough with the current reality and they start to sacrifice to change it, what God does is he multiplies it. Turn with me really quick to John 6. John 6, okay? We're going to be reading just a story from Jesus' life, and we're going to see how this works. Right? Because some of us are still going like, I'm not the type of person who can slay 800 people in a single, swoop, right? I don't have the hero quality. I don't have a lot. But what happens when we just got a little and we sacrifice it anyways? John 6, verse 13. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. And when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, well, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? And he asked this only to test him, for he had already had in mind what he was going to do. And Philip answered him, well, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to just have a bite. See, Philip is in heaven, okay? Philip's one of the 12 disciples that followed Jesus in his footsteps for 3 years. He's been in heaven a long time. But I bet, I'm going to guess, each time Philip hears someone reading or preaching on this story, I bet he rolls his eyes, I bet he sighs, I bet he kind of shakes his head and smiles sheepishly, right? I can just imagine him doing that. But, let's be honest, he reacted to what Jesus said in the same way that we would have if we were in his shoes, There's a solution, there is, but it's too expensive. I know you got this vision, this grand vision, Jesus, all these grand visions you got, to feed all of these people, but let's just count the cost of that. It's just not realistic. So Philip was content to remain in the present. He was content to remain in the present because it was too big of a vision and it required too big of a sacrifice. No way it can be done. And another one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? See, Andrew is a little bit more of a problem solver, and so I bet when he looks down from heaven, he probably elbows Philip, and says, hey, at least I offered something, Philip, But still, Andrew is too content to remain in the present, right? And with all of its constraints, because the odds of successfully feeding 5,000 people with 5 little loaves and 2 measly fish are impossible. It's too big of a vision and it's too small of a sacrifice. Here's all we got. It's not going to make a difference, Jesus. But you know who decided that none of those odds mattered? That none of them mattered? And this is always the way it is, almost always the way it is with Jesus and with God. It's the people you least expect. There's this little kid. The only one we know of out of 5,000 people who came at all prepared that day was this little boy and probably his family. But he and his family decide to part with their provisions for the day, and they voluntarily gave the small thing that they had up to Jesus. It wasn't a huge sacrifice, right? This wasn't heroic. It wasn't. This was simple. Jesus was asking to see if anyone could part with some of their food. They had some, so they volunteered it up. And I'm sure they weren't certain at all what Jesus was about to do with it. They had no idea. But that's not the point. See, the point is this. They weren't so attached to their bread that they weren't willing to share it. They weren't so content with providing for themselves that they were unwilling to see what Jesus could do with the little that they had for the sake of others. Let's just read and see how this played out. Jesus says, have the people sit down. There were plenty of grass in that place. There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there, so that's a little cue. More than 5,000 people were there. These are like heads of households. Then Jesus took the loaves, just the small sacrifice that real people offered up. He took the loaves, gave thanks, and he distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. See, he prayed, and he tore some bread, and he kept tearing, and he kept tearing, and he kept tearing, and he kept tearing, and he kept tearing. He prayed and started breaking off chunks of fish, and he kept breaking, and he kept breaking, and he kept breaking, and he kept breaking. And soon, because the little boy was not so content with his present, because he wasn't so attached to his own lunch, that he was willing to sacrifice it for Jesus. Jesus used it to feed not only him, but also his whole family, but also everyone that was there. And Jesus' vision for feeding the whole world with his truth and life, that vision became more real that day. As a real person met real uncertainty with a very small but very real sacrifice. And the story ends like this. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over and let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them, and they filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. There's a couple of really important truths in there that we need to just grab onto as we kind of wind down. There's that phrase, let nothing be wasted, right? Let nothing be wasted. I think a lot of times when it comes to our responsibility here at Prairie Lakes, whatever that is, however you want to serve, however you want to jump in and be a part of a team, there's a lot of times that we're stopped by doing it. We're stopped from doing it because we start thinking that it's insignificant. Like, I've got too small of a sacrifice. I could be a small group leader, but someone else could as well. I could jump on a team, but I don't know, there's a lot of people here. It's not as though someone else couldn't do the job. And so we start talking to ourselves about how insignificant our gift potentially might be, and then we stop. We don't give. Listen, nothing is wasted with Jesus. Do you understand that? Nothing's wasted with him. Everything that's given to him has this great potential to be multiplied. 5 loaves and 2 fish from a little kid. He feeds thousands. What might he do with your small sacrifice? What might he do? Just think about that and think about this. This is probably where we need to land, okay? Because this is the reality when it comes to vision. When it comes to vision, God uses small sacrifices to bring big visions to life. He always does. God uses small sacrifices to bring big visions to life. It's true in my life. And I said 20 years ago, I was a freshman, incoming freshman to UNI. And so kind of left the church that we grew up going to. And my parents had raised us in church, and I knew who Jesus was, and I had somewhat of a relationship with him, of course. But when you go away from home for the first time, and if you're a parent and you've got a kid coming up to that age, or you're a parent of a kid who's in that age and stage right now, or you're someone who's on the backside of it, as a parent, like how nerve-wracking that is. Right? Because it doesn't matter how you raise them, now they got to decide for themselves what they're going to do, and they could turn out to be an idiot. It's just the deal. So I remember coming to UNI as a freshman, 18 years old. I remember coming to this church in Cedar Falls, this real small church downtown, First Baptist Church, which is now Prairie Lakes. And maybe 250 people there. And I remember there was something different about this church. You could tell when you walked in, and you could tell it because the people were different. And they're just volunteers, right? They're not like ministry professionals, You really got the sense that, hey, we're just kind of flying by the seat of our pants here. But, and listen to me, I'm almost 37, so I remember this still. I remember like people smiling at church, and I remember that being like weird. Like you're almost suspect of it the first time that you see it. You're like, that's not how church should be, But they were genuine. And then here's the really weird thing. 2 people came to my college apartment with a gift of some fresh baked bread, because I had signed my name on, what do we call them, friendship registers back then, but connection card. 2 people from First Baptist Church, volunteers. I knew that I belonged. And they had no idea how much I needed that. As an 18-year-old kid starting a different chapter in his life. It was a big deal. A small sacrifice, but a big deal to me. And there was a lot of people like that I met at First Baptist that really ultimately changed the course of my life. I didn't know what God had for me. I was just going to college because you need to go to college in order to get a job. So that's what I was doing. And I kind of jumped in, and there was people there, and these names still mean a great deal to me. You might know them, you probably don't, but the names were Jeff and Marcia Hansen, and Mark and Susan Stanley, and Kirk and Joan Nye, and Phil and Ann Swisher, and Mike and Denise Goen, and Pat and Rio Clay, and Eric and Katie Weaver. And all these people, right, like walked me through an intense stage of development in my life. And God had such a profound impact on my heart and my life, and I felt this renewal in my faith, and I felt more confident than ever that Jesus really was who he said he was, and I got this through them. And really, because of that, I felt called to ministry. Like I wanted to be a part of a church that had the same impact that this church was having on me. And the whole course of my life changed. My career changed, my path changed, what I was supposed to do changed, because real people meant real uncertainty with small but very real sacrifices, and it changed me. And it still changes me. Listen, with Jesus, nothing is wasted. Big visions become reality when real people meet real uncertainty with real sacrifices, small or big. please, 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 don't underestimate what God can do with even your sacrifice. If you started volunteering for some things that might feel crazy to you, you have no idea how God's going to use that. But you can bet that he will, because that's who he is and that's what he does. Hey, in a moment, we're going to take a very practical step in light of some of the stuff we've heard. But before we do that, okay, let me just pray for us. Father in heaven, thank you so much for the men and women here at Prairie Lakes Church who have said yes to jumping on a team, who have said yes, God, to just leveraging their time and their talents in your name and in the name of Prairie Lakes. Thank you, God, for changing my life through them. And God, would you please inspire a next generation of volunteers and servants to do the same? Would you remind us, God, that there's so many people out there in Iowa who just need to know you through a church like ours. Jesus, we pray this in your name.